Penny Sharpe, welcome into the weeds. It's fantastic to have you on to talk about your amazing career, all the incredible things you're doing, and the awesome responsibility you have. You're one of the most powerful people in Australia. You're the Minister in New South Wales for Energy, Climate Change, Environment, Heritage. You're the leader of the government in the Legislative Council. You're a mother of three. You've got a life outside politics, I hope. How are you doing it all? How did you get yourself into this position and predicament?
Well, I suppose the first answer is I do it all because I have a very supportive family who put up with me, and we, like everyone else, our lives are stuck together with sticky tape, but we manage together, and my partner in particular, Jo, she's just been very tolerant over a very long period of time. So that really only works because of others. It's not really me. But in terms of how I got here, I mean, it is still a bit of a surprise to me, even though I've been in Parliament this year for 20 years.
You were elected in 2005 to New South Wales Parliament.
Yeah, 2005 I came in. But look, for me, it was just the pathway into politics was really about wanting to affect change, feeling like the world, as a young woman, grew up in Canberra, just outraged about a number of things, and really sort of transferring that outrage into action and finding a pathway through the Labor Party because I shared their values, and then just really, as time went on, wanting to be in the rooms where it happens, wanting to make decisions that I thought were the best for people in our community. And so, yeah, that sort of led me there. I never thought when I, turned up to the University of New South Wales ALP club when I was 19, just deciding that I had to stop fighting with people at parties and actually do something. When I signed up, the idea that I would have been in Parliament was just fanciful. I thought I was going to be a food technologist.
What's a food technologist?
Well, I thought I was actually going to be a microbiologist. So food technology is like really, if you're thinking about the food industry, pet food industry, there's scientists behind all of that. I was particularly interested in kind of public health, things like the microbiology of, the new bugs that are coming out that are causing problems, the good bugs that could be doing work. That's where I thought I was going to land. But I suppose my desire to change the world was moved beyond sort of little tiny amoebas into probably a bigger idea of what change looked like.
And you must have been good at it. As a student, there's a lot of young student politicians who think they're good at it. I mean, you're a young gay woman in the Labor Party. It's crabs in a bucket. How did you navigate the factional system, and how did you build your influence and your networks in the party?
I think the thing for me in the way that I've tried to practice politics I think it is who I am. I'm genuinely a collectivist. I'm actually a bit uncomfortable about this idea of the kind of messiah or this individual. I've always just sought out people who are looking for the same outcomes as me and then wanted to, work with them to get the outcome. So the things that drove me into the Labor Party were, ironically, it was when the Labor Party was introducing HECS. I come from a family where my father was the first person who ever went to university, working class family. It was a big deal. My life was shaped by the fact that he got to go to uni and it didn't cost anything. I mean, his parents sent him to the local doctor to get careers advice because they didn't know what he should do at uni or any of that. So that's sort of where, that's where you come from. My mum left school when she was 15. She was a stenographer because that's what girls did. So I think for me, what drove me into the Labor Party was sort of the importance of education and the way that can really take people and overcome all despair. I still believe that free education was really important to me. But I joined the Labor Party to fight for free education. Lost that battle. But, that for me drove it. Women's reproductive rights was a really big thing for me. Grew up in Canberra. There was no access to abortions in Canberra. New people who had to go interstate, all of that kind of thing really shaped me as a young woman in terms of what that meant for the sort of freedom of women to make choices about their own lives. So I sort of, rolled into the Labor Party. But the thing for me, building influence was not, again, what it was about. It was about trying to get an outcome and finding people who'd join the fight. And really that's sort of been, if you look back at the things I've been involved in Parliament, whether it's safe access zones, whether it's gay and lesbian law reform, a lot of that's been in those spaces of conscious votes where you've actually had to make friends with people across the aisle, and it's actually been a real privilege to do that, to see that you can get outcomes outside the party system, even though I'm obviously extremely committed to it and part of it.
And part of building those like alliances and working with people, that was, I suppose, that was formulated, and the crucible for that was the Marrickville Council. That was the first place you got elected. It no longer exists. It's part of the Inner West, but it's part of the People's Republic of Marrickville. You were on Marrickville Council for 8 years?
No, only 4.
Only 4 years.
But
how was that?
Yeah, so good and bad. I mean, getting into it was, again, I suppose, a bit of an interesting thing, which is that the local, I'd been involved in the local party for a long time, had done a lot of work, really happy there, never thought I was going to run for local council. And essentially people came to me and said, we think you should run. At that time the kids were little. My youngest, who's turning 26 this week, I think she was 6. And they just thought, you got a bit of, you care about stuff, you're probably going to be pretty good at it, give it a go. I, of course, first straight away said, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. Anyway, I ended up doing it. What I loved about local government was that it was really close. Like, I can still drive past things. The Marrickville Water Play Park down at Steele Park was off the back of a motion that I moved at council when we were doing up the pools, and I wanted a free space for kids, particularly in apartments, to be able to get cool in summer. And I still am really proud of that, because that was something that the Labor Council did, but you can sort of see it and touch it. The upgraded playgrounds, I love that part of it. So I like that.
You were making decisions, and then you would see them like operating in the real world. That's a great feedback to have, and so you've taken it further from there. Was there a point that you were tapped? I mean, Marrickville is a hotbed of politics. I mean, our Prime Minister, the local member, very active in politics in Sydney and, of course, Australia. But back then especially, was there a point you were tapped where people said, look, we think you can go further and you can take it to state or federal politics?
I don't think I was tapped. I mean, I ran for council, again, never thinking that this was a pathway into Parliament. But what happened, politics is one of those things, the sort of luck and timing is as important as good planning. So people can plan for years and it doesn't always work out the way you think it's going to. I think when I was at council, it became clear that Andrea Shulgi, who was the local member at the time, was probably going to move on at some point. We always wanted Carmel Tebbit, who's been a big mentor to me. I used to work for her, knew her. She looked after me when I was in Young Labor. All of those kind of things. Former Deputy Premier, should have been a Premier.
Yep.
Greatest regret, we couldn't get her over the line, that she didn't want to do it. She was too smart, I think. But, I wouldn't say that I was tapped. I think that it sort of evolved, and when Andrew moved on, there was a sort of a question mark about whether I would run for Marrickville, because Carmel hadn't decided, but then Carmel decided, we all went, that's the best thing to do. It was absolutely the right thing to do. But what that did is it opened up the spot in the upper house, and what I was particularly lucky for is that was the first time after saying no to be asked to do things, I said, well, I think I want to do that. And I was very lucky that I had really strong support across the left, which is where I come from in the Labor Party, and they basically had the confidence in me to put me in age 35 to go and do that.
That's an amazing thing. You would have been one of the youngest people ever in the Legislative Council back in 2005 at 35. You're a young, gay, progressive woman going into a place which hasn't always been, well, let's be honest, it's been terrible at times for women, for progressives, for the LGBT community. It must have been frightening walking in there with people like Fred Nile, the Honourable Reverend Fred Nile in there, who'd been an antagonist for the gay community and queer community for a long time. Were you terrified?
I actually wasn't terrified. I mean, I'd been out at that point. Joe and I had 2 kids, and I'd been sort of what I considered publicly out. Well, it was very funny. When I got elected, the Daily Telegraph ran on this really big headline saying, our newest MP's big secret. The big secret was that my partner and I'd, at that stage, been together for, almost 20 years and
Not
had
a
2
secret.
children. Not a secret. But I think that reaction was more interesting to me. I kind of just went, look, you are where you are. But don't forget, I come from a long line of strong Labor women. So Meredith Bergman and Simons in particular. So Anne had the spot in the upper house. She was a hero of mine. You know, she's just one of the best people I've ever known in my life. Carmel took her spot in the upper house, and then I took Carmel's spot. So I feel like there's almost this kind of legacy of left women who care about kids, who care about the way we treat people with drugs as a health problem rather than a sort of a criminal one, who are really passionate about anti-privatising. Strong left women. Also, when I first came in, Meredith Bergman was the president. So I never really felt worried about all of
you
that.
felt like there were people there that had your back.
Yeah, and I was just sort of ready. What I really struggled with in the early times was more just, okay, I just don't want to be the gay MP. That's not why I'm here. It's not what being gay didn't drive me into the Labor Party at all. That wasn't part of what motivated me. And so it was, I think for me, it was really about finding that confidence around, okay, I had people saying to me, oh, you don't want to be the gay MP, so don't talk about it, just get on with it. And then I had others who just wanted me, that's all they wanted me to do. For me, I think it was a process ultimately that was, look, I'm really privileged, I'm out, I manage my life, I live freely as a result of, so many years of work of others, that I actually have a sort of responsibility to do that. And I sort of learnt in the Labor caucus that people that bringing that lived experience, people they looked to me for a steer on some of these issues, and it moved beyond just the kind of theoretical yes, no or whatever. And so for me, it was really just gaining the confidence to just go, no, this is how it is, and I'm really happy to talk about what that means for people and why I think this is important that we progress this. So I think it's that whole thing really in, I want diverse, I want the Labor Party to be diverse. We're now half women, half in cabinet. People bring the lived experience. The decisions that we make are better as a result, and I suppose, consider myself as one of those who's been able to lean into that a little bit. But I've been lucky. There's plenty of people in the queer community, and I never criticise anyone for the journey that they take in terms of how out they are, when they decide to disclose, under what circumstances. It's, people, it's not actually easy for everyone.
No, it's not easy, and it wouldn't have been easy for you coming in in 2005. It was a difficult. Can I frame it like this? It was a difficult time for the government, for Labor. We had the era of Bob Carr coming to an end, Morris Yema, and a couple of very difficult years leading up to when I came into Parliament, 2011, and then we had, how many years was it? Too many. 12 years in opposition. What did you learn in those years? Because I remember coming in and in 2011, Labor was a rump. You were one of the leaders there in the Labor Party, rebuilding it. It was hard graft, wasn't it? And how did you deal with that? There must have been times when you thought this will probably take a generation.
I think what I learnt in those last 4 years particularly was that disunity is death, that long-term governments need to find ways to regenerate themselves and keep going with a very clear agenda about what next. I think we got lost. I think that there were some members, as you know, there's some members of that parliament who are in jail for what they sort of did during that period. So I think what I learnt was, we've always got to have a very clear plan about where we're going, what we've achieved, but also what we're doing in the future. And I think that got very muddled. I think long-term governments, and we saw it with the previous government, they got there probably 4 years earlier than we did, but that's sort of that internal fights, those problems that aren't resolved really make it very hard, and you need to just keep focusing on actually solutions and people, not your internals, because frankly no one cares. So I learnt that as a really big lesson. And in opposition, it's very frustrating. I didn't want to be in Parliament to just put out a whingy press release. I want to actually be where those decisions are made and be able to shape those and feel as though we're going all right. And I think 12 long years in the wilderness is a very good learning opportunity for those who, again, think that focusing on yourself is more important than focusing on the people of New South Wales and their trust and their willingness to allow you to make decisions on their behalf, which essentially is what being elected to government is is the only thing that matters. And being, integrity and collaboration, it's one of the great things I'm really loving working with Chris Minns on, is that we, our team actually like each other, and there's a really strong degree of trust, and we're working well together, even though we come from quite disparate areas. And that sort of willingness to work through things is something that I'm really enjoying, that I didn't experience when I was first in Parliament.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does appear, as an observer both in the Parliament and I think in the community, that the Minns government is cohesive, that there's been all political parties have their factions. There seems like there is quite a strong accord across the different factional parts of the party, and a sense that people are working away in their areas and collaborating well. And you had 12 years to think about what you would do when you became a minister, and now you're a minister in New South Wales, the largest economy, in one of the largest economies in the Southern Hemisphere, enormous, mind-boggling list of things you have to deal with. Let's start with the big one, heritage. Recently, the childhood home of Angus and Malcolm Young was bulldozed. It's where they learnt guitar. Australia's greatest, most successful ever artists, not just musicians. How can it be that the Young family home was bulldozed? Like, is there a bit of cultural cringe and sort of sneering going on? Why didn't we protect that building?
Well, can I just say I joined with you. I was shocked over the summer when I saw that had happened. I'd literally had some conversations with people over Christmas about we really should do something about that. It's sitting there. It's really important. But it's that classic thing where it was an issue with local government and they didn't do the protections. How do we get the protections right? But also heritage fundamentally is what are the stories we want to tell about ourselves? When you think about, overseas where the Beatles' homes are, they're actually places that people go and really, love. AC/DC is the same for us. So I am actually as sad as everyone else about that, and I feel like it was just one of those things. We didn't move on it fast enough, and we needed to do that. And unfortunately, it's gone now, and that's really sad, because it would have been fantastic to actually recognise it properly. And in heritage, I'm trying to find a whole lot of ways to tell different stories. We've tried to move away from just every colonial building is the only thing that matters into telling the broader stories. Things like the Blue Plaques program, where we're telling the stories of, the woman who basically helped build the Harbour Bridge. She was the secretary to Bradfield, but essentially she was the project manager. She did all this work. She's now recognised. Former war correspondent Dorothy Drain, who ended up being an editor for the Women's Weekly, was the only foreign correspondent during the Second World War. Telling those stories and recognising those are as important about who we are and where we come from. Quong Tart out at Ashfield, Chinese migrant, philanthropist. We've got a whole story to tell of him in early Australia. And
that's really interesting.
We need to do that.
People think about heritage and they think about
buildings.
Georgian, sandstone buildings at the Rocks and National Trust. And I'm pleased to hear that. Well, I hope that we get a chance to redress that travesty of the bulldozing of the home, because 2023 was the 50th anniversary of the formation of AC/DC, and it was a matter I raised in Parliament, and I'm going to revisit it. I mean, Melbourne's got...
I'm sorry we didn't actually manage to fix that, because I am really... It's just a lost opportunity, and it would have been so fantastic, and we just missed it, and now we've lost it, and we shouldn't let that happen.
Well, maybe a big statue to them somewhere we can look at. Now, onto smaller issues. New South Wales is in the process of completely transforming its energy networks, its energy generation systems, its transmission, its generators, how and where we use energy. We're trying to do it in a very short period of time, keep the lights on, keep the power bills down, work to, collectively towards climate action, and it's your job. How is it going? Let's start with snowy hydro, because it gets a bit of bad press, but I've seen more recently that things are developing there, moving along. It's essentially going to be a gigantic battery for us, pumped hydro. How's snowy hydro 2.0 travelling?
Well, it's delayed and it's cost a lot of money, let's be honest about that, but it is actually progressing and it will be built. We've also got good news that we've had the approval in terms of the Transgrid transmission lines to actually connect that in as well. So, look, it is being made. To be honest with you, it's something that under Malcolm Turnley sort of pressed go on it. Probably a little bit more due diligence might have stopped all of that, but it's going and it's going to be incredibly important for the grid. So, look, I think that 28 is when we think that's going to be open. That's the last advice that I've got. It continues to be there. But more broadly, we're in a race against time for a number of reasons. It's really important when I think about this, New South Wales wealth and prosperity was built off the back of cheap, reliable energy under coal. That is phasing out. Our coal-fired power stations, even if you want to keep them open, are basically old. They break down every time they do. When I have to stand in front of the camera and tell people to turn their dishwashers off and do that sort of stuff, that's not as a result of renewables. That's because we've got outages on those coal-fired power stations. The prices become massive. And
because those power stations are old, they can't perform, they can't produce as well as they did.
The cost to replace them is too much, and also they wouldn't be able to get financing because their emissions are too high. Aside from all of the good reasons that we should be trying to save the planet, there's actually a very practical reason here. Security, reliability and affordability is tied up in actually the build-out of renewables now, not in hoping that we can just keep coal going, because we can't. Also, it's just going to be expensive and lead to more blackouts as these things break down more often. This is sort of the reality that gets lost in some of the conversations around this, which is that we're doing this not because we just sort of feel like it. We're doing it for the future, but we're also doing it because we've got a practical reality, which is that these things are coming offline and we need energy to replace them.
And you're really picking up the tools that the former coalition government created, that they created this roadmap to a renewable energy future. So there's been some criticism of the rollout, but not a lot from the coalition, because I think they recognise that this is the work that they started. You have to deliver. There has been some criticism about the rollout of the transmission lines. How are you dealing with that?
Well, I think the roadmap is a really good base, but let's remember it was sort of done in the abstract. I've inherited the implementation. So as you find out that these things, they're harder than they are. They're always harder than they are. We've got supply chain issues and workforce issues, and it's an international problem. And so we've just had to work through all of that. I mean, I've spent the first 2 years really working out, is this fit for purpose? How can we accelerate this to try and do it as fast as possible? How do we buy a little bit of time, which is what the Eraring extension is about, while we get all of that? Look, it's really hard, but I think this year is really, particularly when transmission lines this is really where progress is. So Central West Arana has been approved by the planning system. We've, signed off with ACE Res, which is the group who's going to actually build and operate it. The generators, getting their stuff through the planning system. So, things are starting to move. It's not as fast as I'd like, but we're really getting there. We've just signed the commitment deeds on Hunter Central Coast, which is actually working with Ausgrid. So there's there's been a lot of progress. We're really now at the point where things start coming out of the ground. But we also need to keep working closely with communities, because there is community angst, particularly in the regions. But I think that's also going to people start to see the other benefits that are coming in terms of investment into their area. So it's very exciting, but it's never as fast as you'd like. But I really feel like we've sort of we've put in place the processes that need to do it as quickly as possible.
Another issue that's emerged in the energy space over the last year and as we head towards the federal election, is nuclear energy. It's never been part of the mix in Australia. We do have a small nuclear reactor, which is like a research.
It's not really a reactor. It's not generating. It's for medical research. It's not a generator.
It's not a generator. We've never had a history of nuclear power generation, but that hasn't stopped Peter Dutton, making it sort of a signature policy to roll out across Australia, and he's starting here in New South Wales. He wants to build two. I think it's at the former Liddell site up near Muswellbrook, and another one at Mount Piper,
yeah.
former coal-fired power generator sites. Does nuclear stack up? Does it stack up in terms of both safety and economically?
Look, I don't believe it does. Our chief scientist, Professor Hugh Durrant-White, did a really great paper on this. For people who are interested, I really recommend you read it. It's only about 5 or 6 pages. But he makes the case, he used to work on the British nuclear sub, so he's actually a nuclear scientist. He knows what's going on here. He just makes the point that, look, yes, we could do nuclear, but this is the things you've got to think about. We have no processing capacity. We have zero workforce. We have no regulatory system. If you think about how long it took us to get a regulatory system on wind farms, imagine what it's going to be like in terms of nuclear. So there's sort of the practical realities of bringing it on. There's the cost. This is the most expensive form of electricity. Getting the funding for it's almost impossible. The Dutton proposition essentially is that taxpayers will fund this, huge amount of money, not costed, and it won't even replace the loss of the coal-fired power station. So it also means coal-fired power stations for longer, as I said before, unreliable, higher prices, blackouts. We've got a real gap here. Look, perhaps they could do it in the future, but I don't know how they're going to fund it. And the real challenge for me as the Minister in New South Wales is that we've got literally $32 billion worth of investment coming down the line for renewables. This will have a total chilling effect. It will stop it, because what they're going to have to do is lean in heavily on gas, try to extend these power stations because we've got this big gap. I think it's irresponsible economically for New South Wales in terms of what we're getting to versus what they're promising, which sounds simple and easy, but actually I believe won't work, is actually destruction. But it's they sell an easy message. Ours is more complicated, but we've got a plan. We're doing the plan. What we're trying to set New South Wales up for is cheap, reliable energy based on renewables and free inputs versus nuclear, which is very problematic, ongoing coal, which is super problematic in terms of emissions and climate change. It's very complicated, Jeremy. I'm sorry that it's not there's not simple grabs around this, but at the end of the day, it'll take too long. It'll be too expensive. There's no solution for waste. We have no processing facility.
What do you mean processing? Like actually creating the nuclear fuel?
Yeah. Like, where are we going to get it from? How are we going to bring it in? What's the regulatory system? If you think about even the regulatory system that's around Lucas Heights for that tiny little medical research where people are complicated, there's huge plans around how they transport this tiny amount of uranium waste. We don't actually have a solution for waste. And that's the other part that they don't really want to talk about. They're pretending it's going to be as big as a Coke can. That's fine. Where are you going to put it? And what happens if it leaks?
And how are you going to transport it? So when Dutton made this announcement, you're the Minister for Energy in New South Wales. Was it just news to you? Like, was there any collaboration?
No.
And like the other parties, like, how does the federal government override the will if New South Wales doesn't want a nuclear power generator in its and with I know with Mount Piper, it's in the drinking water catchment of Sydney, so it's an environmentally sensitive area. It's not like a million miles from west. It's 50 kilometres from Western Sydney. If there was opposition, which I think would be likely, if there was opposition, how does the federal government overrule a state government?
Well, they'll have to legislate. So they'll have to get it through. They'd have to get it through the Senate. Interesting in terms of whatever that's made up. But the point is, it's a pretty extraordinary and aggressive move to say override the will of the states in terms of our own. We've got a ban on exploration. Nuclear is not part of our future. He'd have to override our own bans. Also, these are privately owned sites. Liddell is turning itself into a renewable energy hub. We're now manufacturing solar panels on the Liddell site. There's more people working there than when the power station was open. AGL have got an incredible plan for how they want to make this site interesting. I mean, the idea that you'd then even just intervene over the top of a private company, I mean, are they going to compulsorily acquire the site? Again, costs that are just not even factored into this debate. That's what they'd have to do. So they'll have to show a lot of resolve if they're going to do it. It's a pretty aggressive and extraordinary move. And I just don't know that ultimately, with everyone's questions, really do, the voters and taxpayers of Australia, like, is this a blank cheque? Are they going to give them a blank cheque to spend whatever is required? This is billions and billions and billions of dollars that then won't go into supporting manufacturing and getting, renewable energy. All those manufacturers that are doing all the work for the renewable energy zones. Like, we're working really hard with manufacturers to make sure that there's local content and that we get the benefit. Our local businesses, whether it's in the Hunter and the Illawarra and Western Sydney, wherever they are, they can actually really benefit from this huge amount of investment. Again, something that's really, risky if Dutton just decides to come and smash his way through.
Because if we were to go ahead with nuclear, we'd essentially just be contracting a foreign company to come in and build it with because we don't have the expertise. There's no manufacturing base here. We'd just be paying for a French or US company to come in, build one here, operate it, the whole thing.
And the ones that have been built overseas, just look at them. They're all over time. They're all over budget. I think the one in the UK, I can't remember what it's called now, but it started off, it was going to be £10 billion. It's 10 years and it's over £40 billion to build this thing. Okay, it's going to give them some energy, but is it at what cost? When we've got really great wind and the best sun in the world, surely you use the advantage we've got in the way that we used coal previously. Like, this is the sort of the way I see it, is that we've got some really important choices here. But how amazing it is that we can have a choice for clean energy that's free, that comes from nature, that doesn't pollute anything. We've got that choice, or we've got all the problems with nuclear with no solution and incredible cost. It's a no-brainer to me, but as you know, we're going to be talking about this a lot this year.
We sure will, because the Australian energy, the East Coast energy grid has been described as one of the biggest machines on Earth. It's just a gargantuan, running from northern Queensland to Tasmania to South Australia. It's like continental in scale. One of the difficult things is not only like making sure we've got the electricity when we need it, but regulating the voltage and where the power is and when that power is coming in. We've had this massive injection of rooftop solar. More and more people going with batteries. How are you managing, amongst all the other things you're doing, how is the New South Wales government working across that grid to make sure that we've got the storage and the regulation of the network that we need?
The first comment I will make before I get into this is that, look, privatisation of our electricity assets over a long period of time has made all of this harder.
Yep.
I have to live with that. It is what it is. So we've got a whole range of market-based mechanisms. We obviously have the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, who runs the system but also runs the market that makes it work.
Because our generators and some of our transmission network are privatised.
Yes.
So they're
all of our generators. So in New South Wales, nationwide, not Queensland still own theirs, but we've sold all of them, and all of the transmission networks. We own one of the distribution networks, which is Essential, which is basically in regional New South Wales, but the rest is actually privately owned. So you're dealing with shareholders who want to make profit as opposed to sort of building it. That's okay. Like, it is what it is. And we're not renationalising it, even though some people would like us to do that, but we're not going to do that because we just can't afford it. I've just got to get on and build it, and we've got to make sure it's efficient. The
transmission lines you are building, though, will be state-owned.
No, well, yes, for a period of time, so that we do have sort of we'll have private operators for 35 years, and then they come back to the state. So yes, they ultimately will be our asset, which is good. But how do we deal with it? I mean, the other point I'd make is that I just love the fact that Australians love solar, that we've got over 1 million households in New South Wales that have already got solar. It is actually the equivalent of sort of 3 of our coal-fired power stations.
That's
obviously,
amazing.
like, this is where we're almost getting to the point, every house has got a tank. I don't think we're far away from every house actually having their own solar. We've got to still roll it up, but it's going at a pace. The challenge that we've got obviously is when the sun doesn't shine and when it goes down at night, how do we actually do that? So batteries are really the key. Government's got a range of things. We announced, I don't want to get into the boring names of programs, but we've got, the consumer energy strategy with, $290 million. Where, this year that'll be about how can we support more households to get batteries, to work those batteries together in their communities. So that's community batteries, it's virtual power plants, it's working, there's a whole lot of communities that I get to meet who are already doing this work. They want their own community batteries. There's some great examples. So we just want to look at how it's easier. I'm also interested in the equity piece. I don't want the only people who can have solar and a battery to be people who own their own home. How do we work with renters? How do we work in strata? How do we do all of that? I think we're sort of on the cusp of starting to be able to make that work. And the focus for me very much is people at part of the transition. The big stuff goes over people's heads. Unless you're directly affected, it's kind of just, it's a bit out there. I think understanding that you can bring down your bills, that you can, work with the sun, I think people really want to do that. And Australians have already shown that. And I don't think they're all doing it for the planet. I think they're doing it because it actually means that you can, deal with your bills.
Yeah, virtual power plants are something I'm particularly interested in because it's easy to say, but it's a really exciting area where basically you have an aggregator, someone centrally who looks after, who monitors through smart meters the electricity someone's generating, releases it into the market when the energy's needed and when the producer can generate, a good return. That's a really exciting area, isn't it?
Look, the best example I've got is the best thing I like is to be able to point at where it's working. So Bawley Point, South Coast. This is a place that, I think has about 500 people might live there during the year. Over Christmas, they have 10,000 people there. Even prior to sort of the change that they've experienced, everyone had generators because they just didn't even have enough electricity for the people that are there. Then the fires happened in 2019. Our local member, Liza Butler, member for South Coast, she's from there. So she was in the thick of it when the fires came through. They lost everything. They were isolated. That township was isolated for 5 days. That's where she says she decided to run for Parliament. But what she then has done is work with the community, and they've worked with Endeavour, and they basically have put in place their own virtual power plant, which is that there's a community battery that sits actually at the tip. Worked with council to find land to do that. There's a lot of people that already had solar. Endeavour then worked with them, so more people got solar, and I think they put in around 100 batteries as well. They've also got quite a lot of EVs as well. So what that means when we talk about virtual power in Bawley Point, all of that works together. So that excess solar during the day, if it either fills up people's batteries at their home or it goes into the community battery, then overnight it can do it. In the last 2 years, over summer, there's been no blackouts and it's working perfectly. The other thing about virtual power plants, and this is the bit that gets hard and, to be frank, makes my eyes glaze over. Some people are really into it, I'm not. You make money off that. So that's the other part, is it's not just putting a few cents back into the grid. If you're called upon, then basically it goes in and you get paid quite well for that. So in terms of helping people subsidise the kind of ongoing investment in that, that's the real kind of exciting opportunity. It's very market driven, it's extremely complex, but I think Bawley Point's the example of where you can get reliability, security and affordability through renewables. They've shown how it works, and there's a whole lot of other places that are doing it. So it's very exciting.
And speaking of exciting, electric vehicles, do you own one?
I do, yes.
What sort of?
Ioniq 5. I got it last year, yeah.
Is that a Hyundai?
Yes.
You're not a Tesla driver?
No, I hate Tesla. Sorry, that's an Elon issue.
Is it?
Yeah.
Elon, bad Elon.
Bad. I can't stand him. Did you see what he did at the inauguration? No. But EV's really exciting. I love it because I get to show, the New South Wales government is investing a huge amount of money into EV charging. So when we came in...
So talk about that.
Yeah, so the previous government was giving $3,000 subsidies to people who bought them, and we just went, no, we're not going to do that. Because
that was just a subsidy for
people who can already
middle
afford
class,
one.
Yeah, people who could afford an $80,000 car.
And what we really want is, our emissions reduction targets and just, cleaner planet, better air quality relies on rollout of EVs, the biggest issue people have is range anxiety and feeling confident that they can charge when they need to. So we are rolling over $250 million. We've got fleet. We've got a whole lot of incentives, which is, getting fleets to turn over to energy. Tourist destinations where actually EV charging becomes part of the mix and it draws people there. They've got time. You can go to a tourist place. I've been to pubs in the middle of nowhere. They're looking at putting one in because people will stop for an hour, hopefully not to get drunk, but, have a meal, do those things, have a drink, stop with the family on a road trip, get filled up, do all of that. We're also looking at how we manage with apartments. We, in places like Inner West and, so Waverley and Wallara and Randwick Council got together. We're rolling out over almost 200 on-street charges in the next 3 years there. That's our focus on EVs is about making everyone just, learn how cool they are because they're actually really fast, really quiet, great to drive, all of that, but really having the confidence that actually they can just live their life in the way that they do now and know that they can travel and know that they can do that and know that they'll be able to charge when they need to.
So how does an on-street charger work? Because I've seen one on a pole in the Inner West. Is it like do you pull up, charge your car there, and then move it on, and so someone else?
Well, ideally you do, yes.
Yeah,
so
right.
I
You
think
don't just park there, and not every pole is going to have an EV charger.
No, and look, I think partly we're in that learning phase of how the parking impact is there, obviously, particularly in places, near the beach, for example, in the eastern suburbs, where parking's at a premium at the best of times. You want people... Ideally, what you want is people to be able to charge when they need to, and then they move on. You don't want them just stopping in the charging zone. The good thing is that the apps are actually really good these days. So I've got an app that works for mine, and it tells me not only where the closest charging station is, but it also tells me whether it's being used, how long it's going to take before the other car is finished, and when I plug mine in, it tells me when mine's done. So you can kind of do it. It requires, everyone's learning. Everyone who's got an EV, we always end up in these conversations about all of these matters because we're all sort of interested as we're learning and changing our behaviour about how we do it. I'm very lucky. I mean, my car could get charged at Parliament House, so I do accept that during the day I'm lucky with that, so I don't have charging at home.
But range anxiety is an interesting thing because I grew up in a rural area where you had to know the distance to service stations and when they were open. Yes. And they weren't 24/7. They were country, family-run service stations, and you had to know where you were going, when you were going to get there. So we're in that sort of phase with EVs, aren't we?
I think we really are, but
but some of our major highways now, like the Central West, Pacific, Princes Highway, they've got EV chargers just all the way along.
Well, the aim is with every 100 kilometres there's a fast charging site. I think we're close to that already. And everywhere I go, particularly on those ones, you see them putting them in. But
are they uniform? Does every charger charge every car, or you've got to have an adapter? How does it work?
So it has been a problem, but I think we're moving to... My understanding is that we are moving to the standardised problem because, Tesla had their own kind of thing. I need to actually confirm that with you but it is something that I've been really interested in, is that we don't want the situation... we finally moved to universal plugs for our phones. Let's not have different chargers for different things. So my understanding is that that's working. The next step in EVs, though, is also bidirectional charging. So that's where, say you charged your car, you go home at night, say we're having a problem in the afternoon, you can actually use your battery to put into the grid. We can basically take 25% of it, pay you for it, and do it. Because the thing for people to understand too is that the batteries that are in EVs are much, much bigger than the ones that you put on your house. So that being able to then put them into the virtual network, that's really where, at the end of the day, we'll be heading into this whole thing where, people are they're users, but they're also generators, and we have these systems in which they come in and out of the grid that then will stabilise the grid for everyone, which is pretty exciting. That's really the system that we're moving to. We're moving from, 6 large baseload power stations that would just turn on all the time to literally thousands of individuals moving in and out of the grid, saving, using it first for themselves, but then being able to really export the excess, because that's the other thing. We've just got excess of solar. the more we capture it and the more we can move it around and store it is really where it's at, and totally doable.
Well, you seem that it's not at the very least, it's not daunting you. I've got to say that, Penny. A huge, complex issue that's got so many moving and virtual parts. Incredible to think that that is happening, and amazing that you're in charge of it. The other thing you do, of course, is look after our environment. It's a big place, New South Wales. Not only our land area, our air, our water, and it doesn't have a great history. It's got a mixed history, to say at the very best, when it comes to some of the issues around water, land degradation, habitat and biodiversity loss. Are we turning that around? Are you turning that around?
I think we have to. I think that the biodiversity, and when I talk about biodiversity broadly, that is about land degradation. It's about animals and plants. It's about all of the health of our ecosystems. You were actually much more polite than I would be. Like we've in the short sort of 200 and a bit years, we've really wrecked the joint, and the need for us to turn the dial back to healthy restoration of our ecosystems is, in my view, as important as climate change, because they're actually part of the same thing. Nature actually holds a whole lot of ways in which we can help with climate change as well. It's also massively affected by climate change. There was a terrible story this morning on, the penguins that have gone missing in Tasmania because I think the water's too warm and their food isn't there. And there's these chicks who are waiting for mum and dad to come back who haven't come back. Like we're living this already. And so I think it is as important as the work that we do on climate change. I think the challenge that we've got is that, the damage has been so fast that it takes a while to turn it back. I mean, we have this shameful reality that we have, not New South Wales, but Australia has the highest extinction rate in the world. We've got increasing numbers of threatened species that are becoming more threatened and critically endangered. One
of the most threatening processes has been land clearing.
Yes.
The former government really let the handbrake off with land clearing.
Yeah.
How's that changed? Has it changed? And
at the moment, I think we're still seeing the levels that we are, which I believe are unsustainable. So, when the previous government came to government, we were down to around 12,000 hectares a year of land clearing. We're now up over 100,000 through the changes to their laws. We're trying to put in place a range of that, but it's not an easy thing to do. We need to work really closely with farmers and others on how we do that. We're trying to do a bunch of work. The NRC is going to be doing some work on this year.
Natural Resources Commission.
Yep. So we're really trying to do that. Farmers are incredible in this space. There are so many of them that are doing so much great work, particularly restoration work, the sort of understanding of, pollinators and the health of the rivers and the creeks that operate and protection of those kind of riparian zones, all of that work. There's a lot going on there. And we just need to sort of talk with them about that. There's also, I think, in trying to tackle it, and I'm being very upfront, we haven't tackled it yet. We need to. It's a piece of really work for me this year. What do we also? We've got new levers to actually support farmers to do this work. So, and I know this is controversial within the kind of environmental movement, but whether the way in which biodiversity offsets work, so that they can then support stewardship agreements to actually do that and actually pay people to deal with invasive weeds or to deal with, bank restoration of waterways, all of those things. There's actually a way to support farmers in their businesses in a way that we haven't been able to do that before. So there's obviously carbon credits. There's all of those things. We've got some new tools in the box. I think part of the problem we had in the past was just this idea that, well, farmers just should do this for nothing. They're running businesses. I think farmers that I just meet incredible farmers all the time who are already doing this work and have found ways to really, through the Biodiversity Conservation Trust and that sort of private land conservation, we've just got a range of different tools that we didn't have. So I hope that also means that once we sort of reset the rules and think about what that looks like, there's opportunities for people to just get on board rather than just sort of be told what's going to happen to them, because I think that's actually unhelpful.
So that's been, a long-term pretty disastrous story in Australian history, and but there is. I know that you've been doing some really good work in ecological restoration and reintroducing some species. So tell us about what's happening with the platypuses.
Oh, yes.
Is it what is it?
I don't know. I asked the ecologist this, and they just call them plats. So I'm just going to go with that.
So how's that going?
Well, I think that there's a story to tell about rewilding and the importance of it. There's two examples. So one of the most exciting things I've been involved in is the reintroduction of platypus into the Royal National Park. So into the rivers there. It required a huge clean-up and dealing with invasive species. National Parks did a fabulous job. Partnership with Taronga Zoo, who then sort of went and got the platypi, which came, a lot of them from sort of southeast New South Wales. And then we've also had the University of New South Wales who've been doing this. So great collaborations. But the water's now clean enough. We released 10 platypus. They're all still alive. There's been breeding. We've got a little baby one who's been Gilly, who's been born there. So I think there's some really great stories to tell. And again, being able to show people clean water, no native, get rid of the weeds, get rid of the foxes. The power of Australian nature to regenerate itself is amazing. So we can do it, and we can do it. The other part that is really interesting, I've been really fortunate to go out to, is wild desert. So right in the corner of New South Wales, but on the South Australian Queensland borders, the Sturt National Park. Again, a collaboration with Taronga Zoo and UNSW. They've got a fenced-off area, a predator-free area, massive, where they've reintroduced, I think, 3 or 4 now little mammals are back. So they've put bilbies are back. They've put wangamaras, if you've never heard of those, very cute. Bandicoots. And I think they're just looking at putting the quolls back in. Got to watch the quolls. They're actually very aggressive and eat things.
They eat everything.
Yeah, but they've cleared the area of cats and foxes, and it's incredible. So things like this really cute little critter called a dusky hopping mouse.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, but they've just come back. They haven't been reintroduced organically because they got rid of the rabbits. We've cleared it, and then you actually start, when you go out there, you see the impact of these mammals in the ecosystem. This is in the desert, and you see the grasslands come back. There's a whole lot of regeneration. So there's some incredible work, and that's happening in all little pockets of the state. So I think that's very good. But really what I want to get to is how we're protecting the habitat that we've got and how we're restoring what's been harmed, rather than that very pointy end. It's really important work. It's great, gives us hope, really very important. But at the end of the day, if we're serious about turning the dial back, it's actually about habitat and restoration as the primary way in which, I prefer an ecosystems approach. I'm not really keen on this species by species approach. It's very expensive, and I don't want to denigrate the work that's done around it. It's extremely important. But my general view is if the ecosystem's healthy, the animals and plants within it will be naturally anyway. So focusing on that seems to me to be a sort of a larger lever than just this kind of triage at the scary end.
And so a key part of that was is protecting that area, feral proof and invasive species proof fencing. You've got a controversial, a massive job in front of you when it comes to dealing with the brumbies, the wild horses in the Snowy and the Kosciuszko National Park. It's been a controversial and sometimes a very hot argument there. I know you've got getting a lot of feedback, to put it mildly, and some of that has tipped over into some pretty extreme behaviour. I mean, how's that going, and how are you and national parks bearing up in the face of that?
The first national park that I visited when I became the minister was Kosciuszko. I'm not very good at saying it. But, and national parks took me up and we looked across the park. I went up in the helicopter and I was just genuinely shocked at the damage that I saw in this very fragile, beautiful park. There's 32 species that are found nowhere else on Earth in this beautiful place. It's already under enough pressure with things like climate change. But the horses have been able to get up to around 20,000 and they're just trampling the place. Like I naively was in the helicopter looking down and I saw these tracks and I said to the National Park, I said, what are are these walking tracks? And they said, no, they're not. This is on these grassland plains. They're not supposed to be there. This is what the horses have done. And then they took me down and you saw just the smashing of the various little creeks because it's like a sponge there. Incredibly important for water quality further down the Murrumbidgee and all of that. So I was sort of shocked. I knew it was a problem and then just went, well, we've just got to get the horse numbers down as quickly as we can. Then we can start to sort of manage the other things. So that required the decision that we would recommence the aerial shooting, which we did, under really strict, animal welfare standards and all of that. So, look, I believe we've absolutely done the right thing. I think I'm already getting reports. People send me photos of the grasslands coming back. Again, nature is an amazing thing as we're getting the horses down. We'll have the report pretty soon on how many we think there are. We're trying to get them down to a sort of a manageable population level and then keep going, rehoming and trialling sort of reproductive control and those things. We're not eliminating them from the park. It's really important that people know that. So, look, I genuinely feel so proud of the work that national parks have done. They did it, particularly the local national parks officers. I mean, someone chopped off the head of a horse and threw it on their front doorstep of their office. Their kids have been hassled at school. There's been some very personal attacks on some of the national parks people. But to their credit, when I see some of these parkies who've been there for a long time, they're just so grateful that they've felt helpless about being able to protect their park, which is their job and their purpose. Like, they're so passionate. Seeing, particularly some of the older parkies just go, they sort of say to me quietly, I'm so pleased that we're doing this because we can see the difference in the park. So, I feel good about it. It's been tough, but sometimes you've got to do that. And for people who are worried about the animal welfare stuff, some people will never agree that we should kill any animal. My view is that it's not something that I want to do. It's not something that I take any glee in whatsoever. And I have really worked very hard in parks and RSPCA and independent vets to make sure that this is the most humane way in which we're doing it. And having seen the trapping yards and all those kind of things, can I tell you, it's a much more humane system than some of the other things that we've tried and frankly have not been good.
What's the rationale for keeping some horses, not going to zero? Because doesn't that just leave a group that could regenerate, repopulate? Is that a concession to the people who want that heritage element of the Brumbies maintained?
Look, it's partly driven by the legislation that was passed by the previous government. So John Barilaro basically said, well, there's sort of this element, and look, amongst the people of the Snowies, there is a very strong connection around, the horses and the role of the horses and what they did. There's a lot of people who run horse riding, businesses, those kind of things. So, I really sort of respect that. But when we say we're going to do population, this is the thing. We need to get it down. 3,000 is the legislated limit, and then we want to manage it within that. So this is the other thing. It's not just we get it down and then we just let it go up. That's not. We're getting to the point where we need to have a managed population in particular areas of the park where they won't do the damage that they were doing to other areas. It's a balance. I have people saying to me all the time there should be none there. That's been an ongoing issue, and I'm sure that once we've done that, I'm sure many, particularly in the environment movement, will say, well, come on, you shouldn't have any there. That's not what we're doing. We want to. I actually do want to try managing the population. It's very important to some people in the community there. Even though they say I want to kill them all, it's actually not true. I think we can do both. I think there'll be an ongoing debate though about how many.
Speaking of managing populations and the just gargantuan portfolios and tasks you've got in front of you, you're in charge of our national parks. I think it's like 8% or 10% of the state.
Well, we're almost about to tick over 10%. So we've done some very large acquisitions.
Really, where are those?
Mainly actually in Western New South Wales.
Yep.
So there's been some very big ones. And once they're gazetted, because we've got some work to do on them, but they're old properties, we're going to tick over 10% of the state actually being national park, or within the national parks estate. Some of those things are recreation areas, But it's pretty pretty impressive. Back in the day, people were campaigning for 5%, and so there's been some really good large acquisitions. Obviously, things like where we get to with Great Koala National Park, which is very close. I'm sure you're going to ask me about it.
Well, let's go straight into it. Great Koala, because it's an issue close to my heart. I come from the mid-north coast. A lot of people campaign for a long time for the park. It's very close. Where are we up to?
Well, look, we're very committed. It was our biggest, I wasn't the energy shadow minister before the last election, but I was the environment minister, and this was my big ask. So this is the big commitment. We've worked through a process we're working through the process with industry, environmentalists, scientists, Aboriginal, First Nations, all of that. All of that information is being collated, coming to government. Government's got to make the decision, I suppose, on the size of what it is, and we're close to that. I know that people want us to have done it faster, wanted to put a moratorium in relation to harvesting, forest harvesting within the national park. But I tried to be very clear with people in the election that this is the way that we were going to do it. I know people have been frustrated, but I am extremely excited. This is, for me, look, if we can't save koalas in the wild, I think we should all pack up and go home. People care about them. You can't not see a koala and just melt. These are things that, the community wants us to save. And so for me, this is really, we talk about biodiversity and all of that sort of stuff. For me, it's like Great Koala National Park. We've also got a koala park that we're doing in southern Sydney as well. We're redoing the koala strategy. For me, at the end of this term, we want to have really made big gains that are going to mean that the population in the wild is not on track for extinction in 2050. I think we can do it, but it's a challenge.
Do you think we'll see that announcement, that
soon
gazettal, in 2025?
I'm not going to put a time on it, but yes, soon. We want it as soon as possible, but we're still working through the process, and I'd rather get it right and make sure that we've worked it, because there's communities that are affected by that, and we need to work through with them, and I'm really serious about that. This is actually a big conversation. Because you don't hold the
portfolio for state forests.
No, I don't.
You don't, and we're transitioning those state forests into the national park estate. So another minister, and you've had communities for a long time that have been reliant on that timber.
Impact on sawmills and those communities, and that's something that we take seriously and that we need to work through. So look, that work is ongoing. I'm not going to be rushed into it, but obviously sooner rather than later. And, giving some certainty, but most importantly, beginning to build what is going to be an iconic park. The idea about the Great Koala National Park is about it being modelled on the panda parks in China. It's this idea that people want to see them, that we can build actually a whole tourism industry, aside from the just saving of koalas. What is the opportunities with First Nations? The Gambungi people have got a whole lot of really good stuff going on. That's the other things that we're working through with all of that. And I think it's pretty exciting.
One of the things I've been saying is that the medicinal cannabis industry could well be a transition industry for communities transitioning out of coal mining, communities transitioning out of native forest logging. What's your view on that? Do you think the medicinal cannabis industry, of course, is completely legal? It's a massively growing sector. Do you think it has a role to play in becoming a transition industry in some of these areas?
Look, I think we need to be looking for transition industries wherever they are. And I think, my understanding is that there's some work being done in government looking at all of that. And it's not something that I am in charge of, but just as a general thing, if there's the opportunity to do good local jobs in regional New South Wales, we should look at everything.
Sure. Now, it's not your portfolio area, but drug law reform is clearly something myself and my constituents are very interested in the cannabis space. How is that going with the government? We've just had the drug summit. What can we expect out of that?
Well, we've already made the announcement. We're obviously doing the trial of pill checking over the summer, which I think is really good progress. The chairs of the summit John Brogden and Carmel Tebbit are sort of finalising their report. I believe that's coming to government sort of early this year. But there'll be a sort of a government response to that. So I'm very hopeful about that. I mean, Jeremy and we've talked about this before. I was around for the 1999 Drug Summit. I was a junior advisor for Carmel Tebbit. I was actually her youth advisor at the time. And, I saw the dial turn. It's where we saw medically supervised injecting centre, where we saw the expansion of methadone, which had been considered a radical thing. And, it was then sort of, it normalised that conversation. So, look, I think we just need to kind of see where that's going. I mean, I'm hopeful that, again, we'll kind of... The thing that I observe, it's now rather than 1999, is that, the profile of drug use and problematic drug use has changed massively, whether it's, illegal substances like nitazines and that sort of stuff, or whether it's just the use more now, the sort of abuse of prescription drugs, which I think is a much bigger issue. I think, we're going to just have to tackle all that. But we've had a really good conversation, I think, with the community about that, and with, specialists, and that's what the Drug Summit was for. The longer term issue is what are we going to do next, and we need to work through that. So,
okay, that's really good to hear. Now, another issue that I have to raise, because it's literally boiled over in New South Wales and across the country over the last few months. Well, it's been building pretty much since October 7th. It is anti-Semitism. It's an incredibly frightening prospect, seeing that out there in the community. We've seen some pretty strong statements from the Premier. How are we going to deal with this issue? How do we take the heat out of this international relations issue? How do we deal with what is a pretty appalling situation to see that on the streets of Sydney?
I never thought we would be in a city where we would see the sort of attacks that are happening here. It's actually frightening. It's frightening for the Jewish community, but it should be frightening for all of us. New South Wales is a multi-faith, multicultural community that everyone has actually come from all around the world to live in safe and peace, and with the the knowledge that they can practice their faith as they should be able to, free from fear. I've been genuinely shocked by it. Obviously, the government's throwing everything at it in terms of holding account to people. So there's the short-term response. There's the kind of the legal. How do we actually try to legislate? Have we got ways in which we can make that better? And the government's really working through that. When we return to Parliament, there'll be some discussion about that. I think the frightening part of it too is just the sort of willingness for people just to get to this situation so quickly. We've always resisted it. So I'm actually more interested, well, not more interested, I'm interested in where are we failing in terms of the community discussion, the community collective responsibility to defend the peace and harmony that we've enjoyed. It's not something that just comes naturally. You need people to stand up, and you need people to push back from everywhere, because one community is affected. It's not you. It doesn't matter, because it could be you. And we all need to look after each other there. There's been some good stuff from faith leaders on this, but we all I think we have a collective responsibility. The government's got to look at sort of prevention work. I mean, I'm a big believer that you just need to spend time, whether it's in sporting teams or whatever. If we all just know each other as humans, you work out pretty quickly we're all the same. And the interesting things about us are just that we do come from different, eat different food, have different festivals. But at the end of the day, we're people who are just, same aspirations for our lives and want to work together, and that actually makes us strong. And division is a real risk that we just have to stand together against.
Well, Minister Sharpe, Penny Sharpe, thank you so much. It's a beautiful, positive note to end on. I really appreciate you coming, taking some time to come into the weeds to talk about the incredible amount of work you've got in front of you. I don't know how you sleep at night, or that you're not daunted by it all, but more strength to your arm. Good luck with it all. Again, thank you for coming into the weeds.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Remember, everyone, like and subscribe. Done. Thank you, Penny.